I want to cover 2 Samuel chapter 15, 16, 17, and 18. I'm sorry, but that's just where the story goes. It's where it is. We left off last week where the king finally brought Absalom into his presence. He's been back in Jerusalem for 2 years. He came down from Geshur. He spent 3 years in Geshur where he stayed with his grandfather. And now the king brought him back, but didn't see him. I'm thinking, what a strange household this has to be, but I guess I don't have any perspective of knowing what it's like to run a kingly household. But all of his kids, from all of these wives and concubines, they're spread all over town. They all each have their own house, and he allows Absalom to go back to his own house, and then he doesn't talk to him for 2 years. It's just, they don't have the kind of relationship where you just show up at the door and, walk on in. I always felt free to do that. Whenever I came home, I didn't knock on the door. We just go in. It's our house. I expect my kids would do the same, except that Gwen's got the door locked. And wasn't the way in the king's house. And what did Absalom have to do in order to get his dad's attention? He had to speak to the number 2 guy, Joab. And the only way he could get Joab to respond was by setting his field on fire. And, once sometimes you have to light a fire under somebody to get what you want, I guess. And so that's what he did. And so he comes into the king and he bows himself down, and it says the king kissed Absalom. After all that's gone on, after all the things that have happened and all the separation, the king still loves the young man. And so it is, the story unfolds in Absalom's rebellion. I titled this message, Subterfuge, Intrigue, War, and Loss. Because here's where it starts and it unfolds. And it's kind of a gripping story. A lot of these Old Testament stories are that way. If you could just imagine them as a TV program or a movie or something like that. All the elements are there. And it's real life. And the thing is that there are things going on even today that are very much like this. And it happens in real life, and people go through stuff like this. And so it's quite a story. And we're going to have to go like the wind to get through all of this. And so I start with chapter 15, which is Absalom's rebellion. He immediately starts to put in place a program. It says, and it came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses. Remember, he's a spoiled rich kid. He's got the Maserati chariot pulled by white horses. And he says, and 50 men to run before him. So these guys are all trotting out there in front of him. They're probably all got some kind of fancy dress on. So it's a parade everywhere he goes through the town. And it's got to turn everybody's head. He's the center of attention. And we know from the last chapter that he's a very handsome man. He's good looking. He's movie star quality. And he definitely has movie star hair. Packing around 5 pounds of hair on his head at all times. And so he goes through the street, I wonder if his whip was, gold or jeweled in some way. So he crack it out there, and he gets the chariot going through town. And all heads turn. And it says, and Absalom rose up early, and he stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man that had a controversy came to the king for judgment, and remember, all the important meetings happened at the gate of the city. And so he's out there. And one of the reasons he's out there is because there is a vacuum of leadership. David's not out there. Well, cut David a little bit of slack. He's an old man. We're getting towards the end of his reign. And it's harder for us to get things done as old men. And we measure out our energy and our aches and pains, and we make sure that we can do this or that, but we can't do it all. And so there's some kind of a vacuum here. And so he finds himself there out by the gate. And it was so that when any man that had had a controversy, they came to the king for judgment. Then Absalom called unto him and said, "Oh, what city art thou?" He's an engaging young man. In fact, Absalom is a politician. Absalom has got the knack of remembering people's names. Oh, I wish I had that. So it's just so awful, especially. Well, somebody, my friend Mike Norton sent me a cartoon this week. And it's kind of a shriveled up old man. And here's the wife who's looking kind of angry, and she's sitting in the chair over there. And here's the grandson talking to Grandpa. He says, "Grandpa, you keep calling Grandma honey and sweetheart. And after all of these years, how do you do that?" He said, "Well, I forgot her name 5 years ago, and I'm afraid to ask her what it is." So Absalom's the kind of guy who remembers everybody's name, and he engages them. And he says, "What city art thou?" And he said, "Thy servant is one of the tribes of Israel." And Absalom said unto him, "See, thy matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee. The king is remiss in this. I'm sorry, there's no one to hear you. But you know what? I'm here." And he says, "See, thy matters are good and right, and there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee." And Absalom said, "Moreover, oh, that I were made judge in the land, and that every man which hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice." And it was so that when any man came nigh to him to do him obeisance, he put forth his hand, and he took him, and he kissed him. And on this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And it came to pass after 40 years, and that's not Absalom doing this for 40 years. He didn't do that. It's just that we're coming to the end of David's 40-year reign. And after this 40 years, that Absalom said unto the king, now he goes to him with this story. He's been spending a bit of time, and he's greasing the skids, and he's making way, and he's made some arrangements, and he's got lots of friends, and he's built his political base, and he's got things all lined up, and he's got it figured out how it's going to go. And so he comes up with a cock and bull story, because everything has to be done with the king's permission, you understand. And so he comes to the king, and it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow which I have vowed. He's telling a lie. If only there was a neon sign that would say, liar, liar. But that's not the way it is, and that's how they get away with all of this stuff. And sometimes you and I can see that sign saying liar and liar, but a lot of people don't see it. In this case, David certainly didn't see it. He's blinded by his love for his son, and he's blinded by the fact that he's not out there pressing the flesh, and he's not engaged with the people the way Absalom has been. And so Absalom comes to him, and he said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. Boy, it's one thing to lie, but it's another thing to drag God into the lie. And so, but he does it. He does it. But you know what? A man speaks something with his mouth, but it's God who is engaging our heart. We lose sight of that a lot of times. And Absalom certainly lost sight of it, if he ever knew it, because he certainly does not embrace the God of David. David, who has a heart for God. David, who in the midst of all of this turmoil and everything that's going on and all the injustice of what's going on, is able to sit down and write to God, Thou, O Lord, art a shield about me. You're my glory. You're the lifter of my head. He said, I need to go to pay this vow that I vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode at Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. How many people have said that? Get into a hard place, get cornered somehow or another, have something that's going wrong, and we say, oh Lord, if you'll bail me out of this one, I promise you, I will do thus and so. Thinking that somehow we have got the ability to bargain with anything that we can bring to the table. All we can do is come hat in hand to God and ask of him. And God, who knows everything and knows the needs and the desires of our heart and knows what we need physically and situationally, everything else, he metes out the answer. But if we come to God thinking that we can somehow corner him or cajole him or bamboozle him into giving us what we want, we make so great a mistake. And this is one of the heresies of Christendom right now going through America. There are these huge mega churches where men are standing up and saying, you know what? You have a right because you have been tithing to God. You've been giving to God. You can now demand that he give back to you that which is your due. You are a small God yourself. And you have every right to demand of him that he grant you prosperity and health and everything else. And people fall for that. Don't believe it. We stand here in the situation that we're in. Every breath that we take is by the grace of God Almighty who set all of this in motion. And we should be eternally grateful for that. And even the salvation that we seek, he says we get that by faith. And even that faith is not our own. It's a gift of God. And ultimately we find out that everything is just because he loves us and reaches out in grace and just asks us to respond. And we think we can bargain with him. It can't be done. And so he said, I told him, I vowed a vow that if he'd bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. Reminds me of the movie, I can't remember what it was. I think it was, I can't think of his name. Popular actor, Burt Reynolds. And in this movie, he finds himself, thrown overboard or something. He's way off from shore. And he begins to bargain with God. If you'll just get me close, I promise you I'll sell all that I have and I'll become a priest. I'll go into the priesthood. I'll give it all up. And then he got closer to shore. He said, Lord, if you get me to shore, I will, he forgets about priesthood, but I'll start tithing and I'll give you 10% of everything I have. And it gets a little bit closer and he says, Lord, if I get out of this thing, I promise you I'll attend church on Christmas and Easter. And then when he gets to where he starts wading ashore and he comes up on the beach and he says, never mind, Lord, I've got it taken care of here. You can't bargain that way. But he said, I will serve the Lord. And the king said to him, go in peace. So he arose and he went to Hebron. But Absalom sent spies throughout the tribes of Israel. This conspiracy starts growing. I want to backtrack just a little bit here when we get to this. What Absalom is doing is so despicable. If you were to turn to Proverbs 16:28, and it says, a froward man soweth strife, and a whisperer separateth chief friends. He's going in there and he's making a division between King David and the people. And you think how beloved of the people David was, especially at the beginning. And so this this idea of a whisperer going in and separating and stirring up things. Hey, did you hear? Psst, 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 psst. That's the sort of thing that comes into the church too. Oh, did you hear this one? Oh, psst, 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 psst. Pretty soon there's divisions and things like that, and it's a serious problem. And Paul outlined it in Romans 1, 29 and 30, and he lists it with a bunch of sins that beset the reprobate mind. And so in the 29th verse, he says, being filled with this reprobate mind does things which are not convenient. It says, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers. Whispers? Gee, you didn't think a little gossip was that bad. And then he follows it up with backbiters and haters of God, despiteful, proud boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. There's a whole lot of list of nasty things there. And right in the middle of it is whisperers, spreading tales and saying things that ought better to be smoothed over or just not talked about at all. Not allowing something to die down. Not allowing a mistake that's been made to be forgiven and forgotten. But stirring it up and bringing a little bit of division and stuff like that. Separating people, whisperers. Paul talked to the Corinthian church in his second letter to them, 12th chapter in the 20th verse. For I fear, lest when I come, I shall not find you such as I would, and that I shall be found unto you such as ye would not, lest there be debates, envyings, wraths, strifes, backbitings, whisperings, swellings, tumults. You know, we have a responsibility. I think one of the things that we can pray in our time with the Lord, and it's not a bad idea to pray it on a daily basis, is say, Lord, I want you to enter into my life events this day, that I would not bring any concern or care to Anthony, who is my shepherd. Live our lives that we don't bring sorrow to those who shepherd over us. It's an important way to live within the church. So the conspiracy begins to open up here. So he sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel. So he's in Hebron. He's got a little bit more room to maneuver, and he sends people to here and to there and up north and all around, and all over the kingdom. And he tells them, saying, as soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. I'm sure that Absalom is chafing. Now that Amnon is out of the way, that means he's next in line to be the king. And then he begins to covet that position to be king. I can just imagine how Prince Charles lived his life. All the years when he would think, he's in the prime of life. He wants to be more than Prince of Wales. He has to wait until he's 75 years old before he can take over, and don't have that many years left when you're 75, folks. I hope I'm not breaking it to you, but you're on the short end of the stick. And Absalom kind of likes the idea of being king. And you can see that his father surely doesn't understand what's going on. And he certainly doesn't have what it takes to run this place, but I know I do. And so he sends out the word. He's now down in Hebron. He says, when that trumpet sounds, you're going to know that I'm now the king, and I'm ruling in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem. When he left to go down to Hebron, he took with him 200 men. And it says these guys, they didn't know what was going on. These men, they were called, and they went in their simplicity. Oh, Absalom wants us to accompany him down to Hebron. Okay, well, it's the duty. You got called up, you got conscripted. And so they go in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. They didn't know what was going on. And Absalom sent to Ahithophel, the Gilonite, who was one of David's counselors. Somebody that David depended on. Somebody that he would expect would give him good advice. In this whole portion of the story, there's a little something that we can take to heart. Now, a lot of us that we're now past our earning years, we're now in our retirement type years, or else we would like to be. And so, but there was a time when we worked for somebody. I spent most of my years working for somebody. And it wasn't until my last job that I just finally worked for myself and decided that I wouldn't have any employees either, because I'd had all of the employees that I wanted to put up with in the course of a lifetime. And I worked a number of jobs. And usually when I worked in the job, I would end up where I was kind of running something or doing something. And the reason that is because I felt it was my Christian duty, because of what God had called me to do and to be, that it was my duty to fully support the person who was paying me to work for them, to be a credit to the organization, and to make it as successful as I possibly could. Because that's one of the obligations. This is a character quality that God wants to inculcate into our lives, that we be people who are loyal and that we are dependable and we're energetic and we're willing to go the extra mile. And so there are many times, in fact, I can't think of a job that I didn't treat it as though I owned the company. And so if I had to work 50 hours, I worked 50 hours to do it. If I had to go clean out a toilet, I cleaned out a toilet. If I had to go sell a job and it took me after hours to get it done, I sold the job. And I did what it took. And I tried to encourage those that worked with me to do the same. So we owe a loyalty to those to whom we are accountable. And we need to recognize these authorities in our life and work accordingly. This is what you see Absalom is absolutely not doing. And so he gets together and he's sent to Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And this conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. He kept building it and building it and building it. So unbeknownst to David, even his counselor has been taken off by Absalom. So then we come to the next part, the 13th through the 29th verses, and this is where David is fleeing. It says, "And there came a messenger to David, saying, The hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto all his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, Arise, let us flee, for we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said unto the king, Behold, thy servants are ready to do whatsoever my lord the king shall appoint. And the king went forth, and all his household after him. And the king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house. He leaves them behind, thinking they need to take care of it. He assumes improperly that nothing will happen to them, that Absalom won't do anything to them so they can keep the property. But you notice all of a sudden, David kicks into gear. He's had a lot of training. This is one of the things that Absalom doesn't understand about his father, is that he's battle hardened. He's been trained. He knows how to strategize. He knows what's going on. And so he quickly gets everything worked together, and they're making haste right away to depart out of Jerusalem. And you think, why would they do that? Because Jerusalem sits on a hill, and they're building the big wall around Jerusalem. It's an easily defensible space. But you know what? It's been pretty peaceful for quite a number of years. Absalom didn't grow up in war going on all the time. He didn't have to go out into battle. And so there's been some peaceful time. And so I don't know what's going on with the wall, if it's all completed, is everything all set in. But if you're going to go to war and you're going to have a siege, if you're going to be besieged, then you have to have foodstuffs brought in. You have to have enough water and food in order for everybody to survive a long siege. And David doesn't have that kind of time. All of a sudden, he's getting caught short, and he organizes it quickly. And the king's servant said unto the king, behold, thy servants are ready to do whatsoever the king shall appoint. Everybody kicks into gear. And the king went forth, and all his household after him, and he left the 10 women that were concubines to keep the house. So we know he had 8 wives and at least 10 concubines. That's 18 women. And how many children he had? I'm thinking, how could you do this? Just stupidity. When we depart from God's way, it's just stupidity. Don't do it. Don't do it. So he leaves them behind. The king went forth, and all the people after him, and they tarried in a place that was far off. So they're heading out of town. They're heading to the east. Jerusalem kind of sits on a hill, and then on the eastern side is a ravine that goes down there. And the bottom of the ravine is the brook Kidron. And then you begin to go up the Mount of Olives on the other side. And then you continue past that, and you head on down, and then it's a 3,000-foot drop over a very short distance, that 14, 15 miles, something like that, a long drop to get down into the Jordan Valley. And they had to go down into the Jordan Valley, cross the Jordan, and then head north to where they finally end up in Mahanaim. But they're going as fast as they can, and they've got to get this huge bunch of people going, and they're headed out there. And it says, and all the servants passed beside him, and all the Cherethites, and all the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, 600 men which came after him from Gath, passed on before the king. And then said the king to Ittai the Gittite, he says, wherefore goest thou also with us? Return to thy place and abide with the king, for thou art a stranger and also an exile. This isn't your fight. You don't have to go with me. Stay behind. And I'm thinking, what a great guy this guy is. He has come. He's made peace with David. He's offered him his allegiance. And when the going gets rough and there's a decision to be made, he says to David, wherefore goest thou also with us? David says to him, go return to your place, abide with the king, thou art a stranger and also an exile. He says, whereas thou camest but yesterday, should I this day make thee go up and down with us, seeing I go whither I may return thou and take back thy brethren, mercy and truth be with thee. And Ittai answered the king, and he said, and I say this, you got to give him credit. He said, as the Lord liveth, and as my lord the king liveth, surely in what place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also will thy servant be. I'm in this with you, and he will be. And it says, and David said to Ittai, go and pass over. And Ittai the Gittite Gittite passed over, and all his men, and all the little ones that were with him, and all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people passed over, and the king also himself passed over the brook Kidron, and all the people passed over toward the way of the wilderness. And lo, Zadok also, and all the Levites were with him, bearing the ark of the covenant. They grabbed the ark of the covenant, and they come out, and they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had done passing out of the city. And the king said unto Zadok, carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me again, and show me both it and his habitation. But if he thus say, I have no delight in thee, behold, here am I. Let him do to me as it seemeth good unto him. Remember we talked earlier about having open hands when you're making decisions? This is David with his open hands. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the Lord is doing. But whatever he deems to do with me, whatever seems good to him, let him do it. He says, so take this back. He says, let him do as seemeth good to me. And the king said also unto Zadok the priest, Art not thou a seer? Return into the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will tarry in the plain of the wilderness until there come word from you to certify me. Zadok therefore and Abiathar carried the ark of God again to Jerusalem, and they tarried there. To David's great credit, he learned a lesson, because you remember how many years before the ark of God was taken into battle as a good luck charm. As I recall, I preached that sermon, and it was called God is a Good Luck Charm. He better be more than that to us. And as you will recall, the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant. And when the news came back, you remember Eli the priest, who was a big, fat, old man, blind, and he was so struck that he went over backwards and broke his neck and died on the spot. And the Philistines transferred the Ark of God from city to city, and wherever they went, everybody broke out in boils and got sick until they finally brought it back and said, here, you guys take it back, take it back. And David was so thrilled to have it and to bring it back that he built a new cart for it. We're going to do a new thing here, folks, and nothing too good for my God. And so I built a gilded cart to carry the Ark of God. And instead of saying, Lord, how should I do this? What happened was Uzzah reached out because the oxen pulled it, and it hit a bump, and the ark jumped like this, and it started to slide off and all that. You know, how many of us have carried a great load and say, oh, you don't need to strap that refrigerator down. It's real heavy. It won't go anywhere. We put it in the back of the truck and drive off. I've seen those alongside the road. And so it's just natural for Uzzah to reach up there and just, steady the ark. God needs my help. And immediately he fell dead. Because God does not need our help. What God needs is our faith. What God needs is for us to believe whom he has sent. That's what God needs. God needs our heart that is yielded to him and willing to walk with him in the cool of the evening in the garden of God. That's what God needs. David rethought what he did, and he went back and they opened up the books and said, maybe we better read the directions. It's hard for us men to do that, but he did it. And I said, it's supposed to only be borne by the Levites. And it's not supposed to be touched. It's supposed to have these long poles through it and carry it on their shoulders so you don't touch the ark of God. Because we're supposed to carry in our hearts and our minds the knowledge that God and God Almighty is holy. And he is to be respected. He is to be revered, and we should come before him in awe. Not with demands, but with gratefulness and with hearts of repentance. So he says, take the box back, take it back and put it where it belongs. But he sets up a counter-espionage unit. You go back, keep an eye on things, you send word to me by your boys. It says, and then there's the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olivet, and he wept as he went up. He is a man who is humbled, and he is sorry for what's going on and what's going to happen. And he had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up, weeping as they went up. And one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. The word comes out. What's done in secret is shouted from the rooftops, and it comes out, and the word comes back. And David prays. He says, O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And it came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mount where he worshiped God, so he stops long enough to worship God, and behold, Hushai, the Archite, came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. He's in mourning, unto whom David said, if thou pass on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. But if thou return to the city and say unto Absalom, I will be thy servant, O king, as I have been thy father's servant hitherto, so will I now also be thy servant, then mayest thou for me defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. Hushai is an old man just like David. He says, you know what, if you go with me, you're just going to slow us down. They're going to have a hard enough time getting me to where we have to go. He says, so instead of that, he says, what I need for you to do is go back in and you offer yourself to Absalom as a counselor. And he's going to be open to it because he has already conspired with Ahithophel. And so Hushai decides that he will do exactly that. And verse 35, and hast thou not there with thee Zadok and Abiathar the priest? Therefore it shall be that when the thing soever thou shalt hear out of the king's house, thou shalt tell it to Zadok and to Abiathar the priest. And behold, they have with them 2 sons, Ahimaaz and Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiatar's son. And by them ye shall send them to me everything that ye can hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. So as they're going out to the east, Absalom is coming in from the south with his crew of people. And they're coming in with the expectation that they're going to encounter David. But it doesn't go that way. The ascent of the Mount of Olives, what an important place. And we see it so many times in the New Testament. Then how many times that Jesus camped out on the side of the Mount of Olives? How many times Jesus went there to pray? How many times Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is on the flanks of the Mount of Olives? How many times? And if you read in Zechariah at the end of times, in the 14th chapter, the 3rd and 4th verses says, for I fear lest when I come, I shall not find you such as I would. Oh, I'm sorry, I turned to the wrong one here. It says, then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations. We're talking about the final battles here, folks. As when he fought in the day of battle, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives. O ye men of Israel, why do you stand here staring into heaven? This Jesus who has ascended into the clouds off the Mount of Olives is going to return in the same way. And it's going to come upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley. and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And there will be a broad highway opened up into the eastern gate of Jerusalem, where Jesus entered in the triumphant entry, and which is now completely sealed shut with rocks and stones. But Christ Jesus will return and enter through the eastern gate into his city, Jerusalem. Chapter 16, along the way of escape, David meets several people. It says, when he was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba. Remember the Ziba from many chapters ago? When David was taking over as king years and years ago, and he remembers after he's had his kingship for a number of years, and he's thinking, wait a second, is there anybody left from Saul's household that I can do them good? And here was Mephibosheth. Remember Mephibosheth, who when Saul and when his father Jonathan was killed and all that, the nurse ran and she had little young Mephibosheth and dropped him on his head, for crying out loud. It's a serious thing getting dropped on your head. And for the rest of his life, he was crippled. And so here he was, unable to do anything. And David brought him into the household. He said, I'm going to do you good. I'm going to restore your land to you. I'm going to allow you, I want you to eat at my table every night. You'll be here, you'll live right close at hand. And Ziba is going to be your servant, and all of his sons and all that, and they will take care of your land and take care of your wealth. And so that's what's been going on. And so here's this Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth. He met him with a couple of asses that were saddled, and upon them 200 loaves of bread and 100 bunches of raisins and 100 of summer fruits and a bottle of wine. And the king said unto Ziba, what meanest thou by these? And Ziba said, the asses be for the king's household to ride on, the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine that such as be faint in the wilderness may drink. And the king said, and where is thy master's son? He had been servant to Saul. Where is thy master's son? Where's Mephibosheth? And Ziba said unto the king, behold, he abideth in Jerusalem. For he said, today shall the house of Israel restore me the kingdom of my father. That sounds like ungratefulness for everything that David has done for him over all these years and how he's treated him. David, by the right of, the divine right of kings, could have had him put to death, and he didn't do that. Then said the king to Ziba, behold, thine are all that pertain to Mephibosheth. And Ziba said, I humbly beseech thee that I may find grace in thy sight, my lord, O king. Well, you remember we talked a while back, and I said from Proverbs how it says that one man comes in and his story sounds pretty reasonable until you hear the other side of the story and somebody comes in to cross-examine. Well, don't be too quick of what you think of Ziba here and what you think of Mephibosheth. It might not exactly be the way it's being told here, folks. Well, the next person he comes to is another character, and he endures a lot at the hands of this guy. And it says, when the king David came to Bahurim, behold, thence came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came forth, and he cursed still as he came. So he's some member of Saul's household, and he's carrying a grudge. It's been 40 years, people. 40 years, and this guy still hates David for whatever happened here. And it says, so he came forth, and he cursed still as he come. And he cast stones at David and at the servants of King David. And all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And thus said Shimei, when he cursed, come out, thou bloody man, and thou man of Belial. And the Lord hath returned upon thee all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose stead thou hast reigned. And the Lord hath delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom thy son. And behold, thou art taken in thy mischief. because thou art a bloody man. And then said Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, unto the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over, I pray thee, and take off his head. And the king said, what have I to do with you, ye sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said unto him, curse David. Who shall then say, wherefore hast thou done so? And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my son which came forth of my bowels seeketh my life. How much more now may this Benjamite do it? Let him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord hath bidden him. It may be that the Lord will look on mine affliction, and the Lord will requite me good for his cursing this day. And as David and his men went by the way, Shimei went along on the hillside over against him. He's up high, and he cursed as he went, and he threw stones at them, and he cast dust at them. And the king and all the people that were with him, they came weary. And they stopped, it says they refreshed themselves there. Then in verses 15 to 23, we have Ahithophel and Hushai. They start coming to the fore into what's going on. It says, and Absalom and all the people of the men of Israel came to Jerusalem. And Ahithophel said unto him, and Ahithophel with him, And it came to pass when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, was come unto Absalom, that Hushai said unto Absalom, God save the king, God save the king. Absalom probably thought he was talking about him, but I think he was talking about David. God save the king, God save the king. And Absalom said to Hushai, is this thy kindness to thy friend? Why wentest thou not with thy friend? And Hushai said unto Absalom, nay, but whom the Lord and his people and all the men of Israel choose, his will I be, and with him will I abide. And again, whom should I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son, as I have served in thy father's presence? So will I be in thy presence. Well, Absalom falls for that. He's already compromised Ahithophel, and so he buys it. And then said Absalom to Ahithophel, it's time to get some counsel. He says, give counsel among you what we shall do. And Ahithophel has some understanding, and he states it, and he states the reality. He said unto Absalom, go into thy father's concubines, which he hath left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father. Then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. So they spread Absalom a tent upon the top of the house, and Absalom went in unto his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. He did something that was abhorrent in the sight of Israel, and it was against what the Word of God says that he was supposed to do. But Ahithophel knew that this would really cinch it, that everybody would know that Absalom was in charge and not David anymore. And so he goes in and he has sexual relations with each of the women. And the counsel of Ahithophel, which he counseled in those days, was as if a man had inquired at the oracle of God. It was all the counsel of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. He is a very persuasive guy. Chose his words carefully. He evaluated the situation, and he gives Absalom this word. You do this, and it's going to definitely signal to the people that you are definitely taking over David's position. Chapter 17, the two counselors going on, says, moreover, Ahithophel said unto Absalom, let me now choose out 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue after David this night, and I will come upon him while he is weary and weak-handed. And I will make him afraid, and all the people that are with him shall flee, and I will smite the king only. And I will bring back all the people unto thee. The man whom thou seekest is as if all returned. So all the people shall be in peace. And the saying pleased Absalom well, and all the elders of Israel. And you know what? What he's telling them is true. Because they have hastily packed everything up. They're trying to get it moving. They haven't gotten to where they need to go. They haven't reinforced themselves. They haven't even really set a defense. And so what he's saying is true. But then said Absalom, call now Hushai, the Archite also. And let me hear likewise what he saith. And oh, what a tale he tells. And when Hushai was come to Absalom, Absalom spake unto him, saying, Ahithophel hath spoken after this manner. Shall we do after his saying? If not, speak thou. And Hushai, I'm sure rubbing his beard, and to be able to come up with stuff like this on the spur of the moment. So great. And the eloquence. Wonderful. He said unto Absalom, the counsel of Ahithophel hath given is not good at this time. For, said Hushai, thou knowest thy father and his men, that they be mighty men, and they be chafed in their minds as a bear robbed of her whelps in the field. And thy father is a man of war, and will not lodge with the people. Behold, he is hid now in some pit or in some other place, and it will come to pass, when some of them be overthrown at the first, that whosoever heareth it will say, there is a slaughter among the people that follow Absalom. And he also that is valiant, whose heart is the heart of a lion, shall utterly melt. For all Israel knoweth that thy father is a mighty man, and they which be with him are valiant men. Therefore I counsel that all Israel be generally gathered unto thee. Bring them all unto thee, from Dan even to Beersheba, as the sand that is by the sea for multitude, and that thou go to battle in thine own person. You gather this mighty army. You get a group of people that are as numerous as the sand of the sea, and you go out at the head of that group of men, and you be triumphant, because you know how tough your father is, and you will overpower him. You'll go thou in thine own person, and so shall we come, verse 12, so shall we come upon him in some place where he shall be found, and it will light upon him as the dew falleth on the ground. It's just overpowering. And of him and of all the men that are with him, there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he be gotten into a city, then shall all Israel bring ropes to that city, and we will draw it into the river. We will tear it down till there is not one small stone found there. The mighty Absalom will go into battle and will be triumphant, won't he? And the 14th verse says, and Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. It appealed to their manliness. They're going to go in there and they're going to overpower him and be something. And it says the key to all of this is, for the Lord had appointed to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring evil upon Absalom. Proverbs 21:1 says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will. Whithersoever he will. And so, Absalom's heart is turned to do something. And then said Hushai unto Zadok, and here we start having some spy activity going on. This is kind of a gripping part of the story, really exciting how it happens here. Hushai said unto Zadok and to Abiathar the priests, and thus did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus have I counseled. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, lodge not this night in the plains of the wilderness, but speedily pass over, lest the king be swallowed up and all the people that are with him. Keep moving. Now, Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed by En-Rogel, which is just a little bit out of Jerusalem, that they might not be seen to come into the city. And a wench went and told them. Now, why they called her a wench, I do not know. But anyway, the girl goes and told them, and they went and told King David. But it took a little bit of work for them doing it. It says, nevertheless, a lad saw them and told Absalom. Ah, man, it's so hard to get anything done. There's always somebody there to see you. This is why conspiracies hardly ever work. And so it gets into this lad sees him. He tells Absalom. And they went, both of them, away quickly, and they came to a man's house in Bahurim, which had a well in his court. So he's got an open courtyard, and in the center of the court is a hole in the ground, and it goes down far enough to go into the water, and you could descend into this. And so they descend into it. And the woman of the house, she takes and she spread a covering over the well's mouth, verse 19, and she spread ground corn over that thereon. So she's got this covering on there in the ground corn, and so it looks like that's where she's, doing her work. And so the thing was not known. You couldn't tell that there was a well there. And when Absalom's servants came to the woman of the house, they said, where is Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said unto them, they be gone over the brook of water. And when they had sought and could not find them, they're looking all around. They checked the house, they checked the closets, they went up on the roof, they looked under the house, they went in the backyard, they searched the bags and everything else, and they didn't find these guys. So she must be telling them the truth, so they returned to Jerusalem. And it came to pass, verse 21, after they departed, that they came up out of the well and went and told King David and said unto David, arise and pass quickly over the water, for thus hath Ahithophel counseled against you. And then David arose, and all the people that were with him, and they passed over Jordan by the morning light there. By the morning light, there lacked not one of them that was not gone over the Jordan. So they made it all the way across the Jordan. They went 20 miles that night. That's a big hike, believe me. I did a hike this summer. It was only 13 miles, and I was so sore for a week and a half. It was just awful. But they all packed out there. So I've got to admire David at his advanced age that he was able to make this. And verse 23 says, and when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his ass and arose and gat him home to his house, to his city, and he put his household in order, and he hanged himself and died and was buried in the sepulchre of his father. And the reason he did it is because he knew that the only way to overcome David was to overtake him early on by surprise. And now that he knew that they wouldn't listen to his word, he knew that Absalom had no chance against this great man of war. And then David came to Mahanaim, which is way up north, and Absalom passed over Jordan, he and all his men of Israel with him, so they're heading up north too, and they're about another 20 miles up here to Mahanaim. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab. You remember, Joab is with David, and Amasa is another one of the cousins. He's another one of David's nephews. And he's the son of Ithra, who's an Israelite that married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, who is the sister of Zeruiah, who is Joab's mother. So Israel and Absalom pitched in the land of Gilead. So they're up there in the northeast part. And it came to pass when David was come to Mahanaim that Shobi, the son of Nahash of Rabbah, of the children of Ammon, and Machir, the son of Amiel of Lodebar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite of Rogelim, brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and parched corn and beans and lentils and parched pulse and honey and butter and sheep and cheese of kine, which is cows, for David and for the people that were with him to eat. And they said, the people is hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So we come to chapter 18, which we'll see if we can finish this in a couple of minutes. And David numbered the people that were with him, and he set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. He gets them all organized, and he sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third part under the hand of Ittai. Remember Ittai, the Gittite? The king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. But the people answered, Thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that thou succour us out of the city. And the king said unto them, What seemeth you best I will do. And the king stood by the gate side, and all the people came out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. This is the war. This is the preparation. And chapter 6, verse 6 starts the battle. It says, So the people went out in the field against Israel, and the battle was in the wood of Ephraim, and it was really treacherous there. It says, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David, and there was a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. For the battle was there scattered over the face of the country. It was over a big area, and the wood, the area that they're fighting in, it devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. It was so treacherous that they were just falling off cliffs and dying themselves. And so it says, in verse 9, And the Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and somehow the things came together, caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and he couldn't free himself. Some thought he was hanging by his hair, but I suspected he'd more got his head caught in there, and he couldn't get a hold of it in order to lift himself out, and he was in there, and he's caught. And sometimes that happens. Goodness, there was a story, they made a movie out of it, I believe. A guy who was hiking in the wilderness in Utah, I believe, and got stuck in the rocks, and his arm was wedged so hard that the only way he could save himself was to cut his arm off. And he survived. He had to cut his own arm off to get out. Here's Absalom hanging by his head, stuck in the tree, and he's struggling and trying to get out of there. Couldn't do it. And a certain man saw it, and he told Joab and said, Behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an oak. And Joab said to the man that told him, And behold, thou sawest him, why didst thou not smite him to the ground? And I would have given thee 10 shekels of mine hand and 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. And the man said unto Joab, Though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver of thee, and Abishai and Ittai, saying, though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver in mine hand, yet would I not put forth mine hand unto the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Beware that none touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I would have wrought falsehood against mine own life. For there is no matter hid from the king, and thou thyself would have set thyself against me. He said, not buying that story. And then said Joab, I may not tarry thus. Get away. I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hand, and he went over and he thrust them through the heart of Absalom. Joab is quite the cowboy. This is not the first time, nor the last, when he would not quite keep the king's orders. And yet the king keeps putting up with him. And so he thrust him through with 3 darts. And while he was yet alive, he did this. And it says, And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about, and they smote Absalom, and they slew him. And they cut him out of the tree. And Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing after Israel. For Joab held back the people, and they took Absalom, and they cast him into a great pit in the wood, and they laid a very great heap of stones upon him, and all Israel fled, everyone to his own tent. His whole army just disappears, because now the jig is up, and David is restored as king. It says, now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. So I don't know what's happened to his children in all of this deal, but his sons have apparently passed, and I don't know about his daughter, but I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called unto this day Absalom's place. So it was a landmark, and everybody knew about it. And so then the news goes out, and I'm going to paraphrase this next stretcher because we're just totally out of time. And so Ahimaaz, who is the son of Zadok, wants to take the news back to David, but Joab says, no, you're not the one that's going to bear the tidings this day back to David. He says, but thou shalt bear tidings another day. And so he sends Kusi and tells him what to do, and he takes off. But then Ahimaaz says, no, let me take news, let me know. He says, you don't have anything to say, but go ahead and run. Ahimaaz, he was a marathon runner. He says he took a different route, and he outran Kusi. And so they're up where David is, and he sat and where David's sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up on the roof of the gate of the wall, and he lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and behold, a man running alone. And the watchman cried and told the king, and the king said, if he be alone, there is tidings in his mouth. And he came apace, and he drew near, and the watchman saw another man running. And the watchman called unto the porter and said, behold, another man running. And the king said, he bringeth tidings. And the watchman said, methinketh the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz. So apparently he had a reputation. Everybody knew he was really fast. And the king said, he's a good man. He cometh with good tidings. Afraid not. And Ahimaaz called and said unto the king, all is well. And he fell down to the earth upon his face. He's breathing hard before the king. He said, blessed be the Lord thy God, which hath delivered up the man that lifted up their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, is the young man Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, but he couldn't bring himself to tell him. And he says, when Joab sent the king's servant and me thy servant, I saw a great tumult, but I knew not what it was. And the king said unto him, turn aside and stand here. And so he did. And he stood still. And then Kusi came, and Kusi said, tidings, my lord the king, for the Lord hath avenged thee this day, and all them that rose up against thee. And the king said to Kusi, is the young man Absalom safe? And Kusi answered, the enemies, my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. And the king was much moved. And he went up to the chamber over the gate, and he wept as he went. And thus he said, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, would God that I had died for thee. O Absalom, my son, my son. And how many years later, from a vantage point, perhaps up in that very same place, in Matthew, the 23rd chapter, in the 37th verse, Jesus, looking down over that city, says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. O Lord, I pray that we would be found faithful at your coming, and that you would not look with sorrow on any of us. Lord, may all who come within the sound of my voice yield to you, be willing to serve you, and accept your great and wonderful grace and deliverance. Restore us, O Lord, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.